Good evening, everyone. Chag Sameach. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces. I'm Rabbi Carrie Brown, one of the rabbis here at Temple Shalom. This is really a beautiful and sweet tradition that has really become tradition in Vancouver of our congregations of Temple Shalom, Beth Israel, or Shalom and Harel to all come together on Erev Shavuot for this evening of study and learning and community and just being together and joining in what connects us so strongly as a Jewish people, which is Torah. So I do want to welcome all of you and encourage you tonight as we study. The format of this evening, we're going to first hear an introduction to this topic of Thou Shalt Not Steal from Rabbi Infeld. And then we're going to hear some talks by Rabbi Gibbs of Harel, Rabbi Dresner of Or Shalom, and myself, with opportunities after each of those talks to have discussion together. And we really encourage you in these discussions to get to know one another, to involve people that you don't know who are from other shuls, other perspectives, to study and to take advantage of this time that we've come together. I do also want to send greetings of Chag Sameach from Rabbi Dan Moskowitz, our senior rabbi here at Temple Shalom. Unfortunately, he has a sick kid at home, so he's going to stay home and be with him. But he'll be here tomorrow for our Shavuot morning service. After our study this evening, we will join together in a Mariv service, an evening service, led by Cantor Cohen, our cantor here at Temple Shalom, and Rabbi Stein from Beth Israel. And then, of course, we will have cheesecake. So we're looking forward to that, I know. So I will invite Rabbi Infeld to come and give us an introduction to our study tonight.
It is important to mention, of course, because I heard about at least one person who said that they might not come tonight if it had been cheesecake from anything other than baked by and created by my wife. So just so you know, my wife made the cheesecake. Thank you. Have a good night. So we, as the organizing group of rabbis of this evening, decided that we would like to teach on one particular mitzvah of the 10 Commandments, of the Aseret HaDibrot, or the 10 utterances. And we decided that we would teach, or the idea was we should teach on the mitzvah of do not steal. And I popped in and said, actually, that's not actually in the Aseret HaDibrot. And it's not actually part of the 10 Commandments. Of course, if you know the 10 Commandments, you know that my statement is completely and utterly wrong, right? Of course it's part of the 10 Commandments. Al tignav is there, it's right there, don't steal. But actually, here's the catch. We were debating also what would be interesting, right? Well, is this black and white? Is it gray? And the very fact that I just said it's not even in the 10 Commandments puts us into a gray area. So what makes tonight very interesting is that don't steal is actually not a boring topic at all. It's not black and white. It's actually very gray. And in fact, increasingly more so as the world develops in terms of technology. Now, what did I mean by al tignav, don't steal? Don't steal isn't in the 10 Commandments, because it clearly is. Well, the dominant rabbinic thought, because this particular mitzvah comes right on the heels of others for which one receives the death penalty, the rabbis ask, how is it possible that this precedes the others? And the answer is, the Torah doesn't mean don't steal, as in don't walk into the bay and steal a pair of socks. That's not what the Torah is talking about in the Aseret HaDibrot. It's got to be something much more significant. So the rabbis hold that in the Aseret HaDibrot, what we're talking about is kidnapping. Don't steal another human being. And when we think of al tignav, don't steal, as in don't walk into the bay and steal a pair of socks, that's found elsewhere in the Torah. It is a mitzvah, a negative mitzvah, that you're not allowed to do that. But some rabbis hold that's not exactly what is clear in the Aseret HaDibrot. We will see this evening that this one clear or seemingly clear black and white mitzvah of don't steal is maybe not as clear as we thought it was when we walked up the stairs or took the elevator into this sanctuary earlier. And if you leave a little bit more confused than you left, then I think we've done our job well. Now, talking about confused on a topic that is clearly not easy, I'm going to ask Rabbi Gibbs to step forward and teach us a little bit about stealing and AI.
So I guess we'll just begin the evening by throwing ourselves into our dark apocalyptic future, by thinking about both, as we've seen, just a huge advance, even in this last year, of what AI can do, that it's important to think about what it actually is doing. That it's the joy of being able to say, ChatGPT, write me an introduction to this speech, which I did not do, but it feels like every single article and podcast began that way. That is thinking about what is actually happening. Is there some sort of computer program that has analyzed the deep structure of strong speeches and is able to sort of create something out of that, where it's something that is both more broad in a way that makes it much more complicated to think what's actually at stake. Again, I'm not a computer programmer, I'm a rabbi. And so it's my job to speak about things that I don't understand. But from what I understand, that really what a lot of the generative AI is doing is looking at the sort of deeper patterns, and from there, being able to think about what are the words that most go together. And so on the one hand, it's easy to imagine, or it's hard to imagine, that if I asked it to write, the description of a Shavuot event, that never in a million years would it come up with, a rabbi named Philip Gibbs, where I believe I'm the only Rabbi Gibbs in North America, where of course it would easily come up with a Cantor Cohen, because Shani is very special, but she does not have a very special name. So in having, in some ways, those very clear patterns of words and language that goes together, that is then able to sort of create paragraphs that are going to sound plausible. And so the question then, actually, can I have a source sheet? And so the question then, that as a lot of this material, that, in looking at so many things that are on the internet, that the question then becomes, where is it getting its information? And is that going to be something that constitutes stealing? Of course, this is something that delves into the details of intellectual property. And so I just want to make sure, is there an intellectual property lawyer in this room? That is both in some ways deeply comforting because I still get to be the expert, but also terrifying because who knows where we're going to go. That on the one hand, it is that concern that whether it's, essentially articles that I perhaps post on my website, pictures that I post on, a Flickr account of, a painting I did or a trip I did, that a lot of these databases are able to look at that material, to be able to code, what is the pattern of language that I use, what is the pattern of shapes and colors that then make, this painting fit the painting of a sunset, and from there, build those patterns to be able to create its own. And so it, on the one hand, is based off of nothing, because at no point are these programs, essentially stealing my articles and, storing them in some sort of deep library. At the same time, if it wasn't for the fact that it read and took the information from the work that I did, it wouldn't be there. And so what I wanted to do is sort of suggest 3 different models of the way that maybe we can think about sort of what's at stake with this type of technology. And then I'm going to sort of let you decide first. You can just talk amongst yourselves about anything you want. Ideally, you'll be able to sort of ask which of these models seems to make the most sense, as well as what it seems to capture and what it's missing. So the first one is this idea of having a positive commandment. There's a passage in Pirkei Avot that says, "Whoever teaches something in the name of the one who originally said it brings redemption to the world." So for anyone who's been in academia, it is a Jewish value to cite your sources. And the example they use is that when Esther tells King Ahasuerus about the plot to kill him, she quotes it in the name of Mordecai, her cousin, and then later, the king remembers that he never rewarded Mordecai, and that's the turning point of the Purim story. And so here, it seems to be this very positive value of us being able to cite our sources. And so perhaps when we apply that to this scary future of AI, that is needing in some ways the clarity of what these programs are looking at in order to gain their knowledge. That I personally would be much more happier if, knowing that it essentially built its knowledge based off of literature, based off of, news sites, as opposed to, say, being based off of incredibly angry internet forums where people are yelling about knitting because that's going to create more conflict rather than less conflict. And so, it's just needing that clarity and transparency of knowing where that information came from. Or perhaps it's something that's more in the direct model of stealing. So in rabbinic literature, in Bava Kama, the volume on essentially just tort law, that it uses this image of asking if someone steals some wood and uses it to build a building, whether or not, essentially, how do you then pay back for that wood you stole? So it's, in some ways, it's the question of, do you essentially pay someone back for, the beam of wood, or do you essentially need to pay them the value of your house because that's the only way for them to get the beam back? Similarly, in the second source, it's the idea of do you need to tear down the building in order to return it? And so, again, simply with our, perhaps this is more easily when we think about, the people using it for art or music, that essentially, if I train an AI program to, mimic, sorry, can I use you again? If I use my AI program to be able to capture the essence of Cantor Cohen's voice, essentially then I create, a fake Cantor Cohen program to sing all sorts of funny songs. Is it the case that, simply I just owe Cantor Cohen a cut of the money because it is using her voice? Or is it the type of thing where I have to essentially stop and undo all of that because it's incredibly harmful for me to have stolen Cantor Cohen's voice? Okay, and then on the second page, I have a nice long source that you can look at in your discussion group that is very adamant of what you should be doing. And then the last one is going to come out of left field, which is more of the question about, do we lose our sense of humanity? So I'm now going to try to make a connection between kosher slaughter, shechita, and AI. Are we ready for this? Okay, I guess how many people are vegetarians? I apologize. There will not be much blood here. So there's this very bizarre teaching that for shechita, that it doesn't require intention in the same way that many other actions do. That there's a sense that when we pray, we must pray with intention. That when you blow the shofar, you must be blowing the shofar knowing that it's Rosh Hashanah and it's time to blow the shofar. For shechita, that's not necessary, but it needs to be a human action. And it uses this sort of, example of if you happen to throw your knife and it, cuts the chicken's throat correctly, then the meat is kosher. And then, similarly, this is the last source here, it says that when that there's a debate. If you use a machine to kill the animal, is it kosher or is it not kosher? And what they say is that when it seems to be this essentially machine that takes a human action, that would make it kosher. And even when it's something like a water wheel, that for the first time that you open up the sluice gate and that the wheel starts to spin, in that first rotation, it's because you, as a human, did the action that caused the wheel to spin, that it's going to essentially be that human action that is human enough to be a kosher slaughter. And so, as we then think about the many applications of AI, it is the question of instead of perhaps stealing the intellectual property, is it more of that concern of stealing jobs? That, of course, so much of this is just in the news all the time. That in thinking about the current writer's strike in Hollywood, that one of the concerns is the fear that studios would simply just create a simple sitcom script using generative AI, and even if it's not the best script out there, that it's good enough that I'll watch it when I turn on Netflix when I get home, and I don't. Wait, what? You said it's easy to imagine? Oh, okay. Oh, never mind. And so it's that fear of the way that it's needing to essentially continue to have that human touch. And so I'll turn it to y'all to discuss. Do you think that is the scariest idea? The sort of need to know where we're getting the patterns and the information. Is this ultimately just a debate over intellectual property and copyright? Or is it this fear that is sort of stealing our humanity? And so I'll invite you to sort of turn to the people next to you, perhaps groups of anywhere from 4 to 6, ideally from someone you did not come with or someone you do not see on a weekly basis. And I'll let you decide which is the model you prefer to understand this.
Yai la 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 yai la 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 yai la la yai la 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 yai la 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 yai la 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 yai la la yai la 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 yai la la yai la yai la yai la 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 yai la yai la yai la 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 yai la. Back to you.
So I guess one of the applications that we talked about in that group is the way that, especially for a lot of Jewish music and nigunim, really feels like it is built off of music that already exists. I mean, any conversation is, but the problem is, at a certain point, if you're an artist and you're a composer, you want to be compensated for your work. So does anyone have any? I guess we have 2 minutes. Does anyone have any insights they want to share from their group? Yes.
I'm not mad about the existence of AI.
Okay.
I am completely enraged by the weight and the value that AI doesn't have today.
So when you say you're angry about the process in the way that it's,
Yes, because it is extremely sophisticated, not just for people who create art, but also for people who train machine learning algorithms that eventually figure out how to draw.
right, so you're saying that it's both kind of that intellectual property issue that is being exploitative of the artists, as well as exploitative of, again, all of the sort of academic work in machine learning that's now essentially being held by really 4 companies. Great. Yes, that is not good. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, when it means not my fault, I work for Microsoft.
Right, I guess that was the other question. Do we have any people in Microsoft that we're able to give our feedback back to?
But I'm also a privacy professional before I worked for Microsoft. And I have to say that there are some wonderful laws, particularly out of Europe, that say that if you're going to use AI, it cannot be used to make decisions that affect the person's life in a negative way or that affects without involving a human's decision in there. So it cannot be used. So that's where we need to have a framework around AI.
Right, and in some ways that's why I brought that last source of emphasizing that need for that kind of human touch in a lot of these things. Yeah.
And there is absolute fantastic cases where the use of ChatGPT or other cases are human enhancing,
Right.
like the identification of cancer by training it on positive and negative samples so that it has the capability of being much more unbiased in what it's seeing and not making as many mistakes as the humans do. And that's helpful. So we've got to be careful when we, in our own biases,
Right.
in our own fears, we don't actually document ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, I think you, and then I think that will be it. So you have the last question.
Okay, can I just stop you? I would simply like to say that my personal opinion is that when an AI makes its database out of everything that is publicly available, whether it's art or voice recording that people's music or people's writing, whether it's a blog or a journal or a magazine, I think that's definitely theft because when people were writing these things and posting them and when they were being put up online maybe 10 years ago, maybe even longer ago, this kind of AI art and this kind of AI writing wasn't a possibility, so it wasn't something anyone could agree to. So I think that it's absolutely theft for AI to simply make their databases out of things that are available online without people's agreement. Because that was not what people posted things online.
Right, which is, again, I would say it does have a difference between, again, using the technology within cancer research, again, is within a very specific data set, were ChatGPT. And in some ways, it is the question of there's plenty of open source material that it was able to take a lot, but definitely the sort of art is where it gets more complicated, and that's where it seems to be the more clear-cut case of, that will be theft. Did I have a pithy end? No, so I guess one of the human failings that I have is that I'm not always good at being able to have that nice joke to finish things. Perhaps I can take some comfort in that AI would help me come up with something, but I don't know if it would actually be funny. So, great. Thank you all for your insights and thank you for your experience. And next we'll hear from Rabbi Dressman. Or are you?
My topic is not quite as au courant, but I think it's a good kind of ethical question about this sense of as Rabbi Infeld talked about, thou shalt not steal is more complicated than we really think. It seems black and white, but sometimes when we get into the ethics of, well, why is someone stealing, or what is behind their need, it does become a little bit more difficult. So, legend is that in a bitterly cold day in February in 1846, the French writer Victor Hugo was on his way to work when he saw something that affected him profoundly. There was a very, very thin young man with a loaf of bread under his arm being led away by the police. Bystanders said he was being arrested for theft, for stealing the bread. He was dressed in mud-spattered clothes, his bare feet thrust into uncomfortable clogs, his ankles were wrapped in bloodied rags. Now, any of you, I'm not going to start singing, don't worry, but any of you who have read or watched Les Miserables will recognize that wretched scene immediately. When Hugo witnessed that scene, he was already 3 months into the writing of the novel, and until then it had really all centered around the character of Fantine, who also was forced into difficult situations based on her poverty. But into that plot, he suddenly added the story of Jean Valjean, the out-of-work peasant who steals a loaf of bread in order to feed not just himself, but his sister and her children. So clearly, Torah says, lo tignov, don't steal, but this ethical blurring of boundaries is around the edges, in particular around these situations when theft is done for the sake of another, maybe higher moral principle. We know that Jewish law holds by this principle of pikuach nefesh, the obligation to save someone's life, as the most important and highest ethical standard. And we can transgress pretty much any mitzvah in the Torah, except for 3, which, just as an aside, in case you're curious, they are murder, idolatry, and sexual immorality. But anything else, including theft, it seems to be kind of clear that one can transgress in order to save a life. The Torah, we get this obligation from the verse, V'chai b'hem, that you shall live by them, by the mitzvot, and that if the observance of a mitzvah, a commandment in the Torah, would create a risk to human life, that, again, the preservation of life takes precedence. So I could be done right there and say, take the bread, you need to live. But despite this, there are some examples within the rabbinic corpus, our tradition, and when the rabbis hold up theft as also being like one of those big 3 no-nos, that it's so important. So we're going to look at a couple different sources to try and determine this evening, where is this balance? Is theft this very clear-cut no-no that we just have to abide by, and because it is so essential to that code of morality, connected to what Rabbi Infeld said about kidnapping, which is in its own sense, if you see theft as kidnapping, that's also endangering a life, and therefore it's just as bad? Or is there this kind of gray area within the ethics of pikuach nefesh, in which certainly theft is not as big of a deal as the saving of a life? So we're going to look at our first source. So this is on the page in your source sheet. It's got stealing a loaf of bread on the top. And this is, everything's in the Talmud. So there is a story about stealing a loaf of bread in the Talmud. This is from the tractate Yoma. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were walking on the road when Rabbi Yehuda was seized with bulmus, which is ravenous hunger. He overpowered a nearby shepherd and ate the bread that the shepherd had in his hand, since his life was in danger. Rabbi Yossi said to him, "You have robbed that shepherd." Okay. Then, when they reached the city, Rabbi Yossi was seized with bulmus. Okay. And all of the people surrounded him with jugs and plates with all sorts of sweets. Rabbi Yehuda said to him in jest, "I robbed only the shepherd, but you have robbed the entire city." Okay. So we'll do a little bit of this as a large group before we break into our smaller groups. But what's the difference between these two rabbis and the perception of theft? Charlie?
Well, it's force. He overpowered the shepherd, and then the people came to, Rabbi Yossi.
Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda did an active sort of theft in overpowering the shepherd. He pounced on him, basically, right? He literally took the bread out of his hand. Now, who's to say the shepherd wasn't hungry and having this ravenous hunger? So, okay, fine. Yeah, John?
Did the people that surrounded Rabbi Yosef know that he was ravenous and wanted him to take the food? Or did it happen to just be there and he decided to take it?
Okay, so first of all, just before this little snippet that I brought, there's a whole discussion about how to treat bulmus, how to treat ravenous hunger, and it talks about giving people sweets and things with honey and dates, that this is kind of the way to help someone, raise their blood sugar or something like that. But it seemed like the people in the town were doing more an act of kindness, right? They were bringing the food to him. And so something different happened here. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say, "You robbed the whole city"? He took without paying. Excellent. Okay. So when we say theft, one of the big ideas that comes up from the rabbis is that theft is because, besides the kidnapping piece, but theft in the more kind of mundane way that we think about stealing the socks from the bay is about that you're not compensating the people for what they, and that this wasn't, if it's a gift is a gift, but maybe this wasn't a gift with that intention, and here, he didn't give them any compensation for what they gave them. So that's a kind of theft, and it was not just one person, but this whole city came and you took from them without any compensation. Okay.
It can also be about the excess, because Rabbi Yehuda just had bread he needed to overcome that moment, whereas that was, if everybody sort of felt obliged to put out all these sweets and drinks, that probably that created a lot of waste, that some of that might have been, there's so much more than he needed. Sort of that.
Okay. Great. So everyone brought these things. He didn't need that, and he was, kind of from the first few bites, perhaps he was no longer in that state of ravenous hunger, and therefore he wasn't. It wasn't necessary for him to eat all of these things, and so that was excess that then became theft for what was beyond his needs for pikuach nefesh. Yeah, Ross.
So maybe the expectation of the city was that through their adulation, through their gift giving, they would receive some, divine gift in return. That they would receive, the rabbinic blessings that they sought. And his companion was saying, "Well, you're really not going to give them all those things that they're expecting in return. So therefore, you are stealing their adulation in the form of food for which you're not going to repay."
Right. So there's, again, that issue of compensation not coming to fruition. Exactly. Yes, Greg.
Last part of the story strikes me as like a little bit of a fantasy. The rabbi walks into the city, says, "I'm hungry." Everybody runs out with all these candies and right? And it's almost like he's taking advantage of the sort of respect that he knows he's going to get as soon as he walks into that city, right? And in that way, he's sort of creating this sort of his self-sense of renown for these commodities that people want, that people are giving, and maybe they have more, maybe they don't.
So he's taking advantage of what they're able to offer, and by doing that, because of his status, and because of that, then it's theft, because they can't give it to him as a gift. They can't really afford that. And so, okay. So I think either way, we can see that here in this piece of Gemara, we can see it either as it's all theft, right? Whether it's you're taking this out of someone's hand, this poor shepherd, even if you're starving, and if you're getting all of these sweets from the people in the city, you're taking from them, that's theft. You can say that, or you can say none of it's theft, right? If you're saying, look, you're getting all these sweets from the people in the city, ha ha ha, you think that's theft too, but what I did was actually more necessary, and therefore you can't call mine theft. It's not clear there. So let's keep going. Let's see how things evolve. So the rabbis do talk a little bit in the Shulchan Aruch. I didn't bring this source, but that theft for pikuach nefesh, for the saving of the life, is permitted, but only on the condition that the property is returned, or the value of that property is returned. So then it's not really a theft, it's more of a purchase or a loan that's made for, that's just been delayed. But the rabbis also teach that it's forbidden to steal because that can lead to a habitual theft, that you become used to that type of behavior. So this is from the Mishnah Torah in the middle. The Torah prohibits stealing even the slightest amount. It is forbidden to steal as a jest, to steal with the intent to return, or to steal with the intent to pay. All is forbidden, lest one habituate oneself to such conduct. Okay, so there it seems like, no, you cannot steal at all, because of the slippery slope issue that might cause. So I'm going to go back to more musical theater. Okay, so this is, you can tell me where this is from. Gotta eat to live, gotta steal to eat. Aladdin, very good, okay. So Aladdin's theft, he was a habitual thief. Right? That's how the story opens. He's like running through the market, stealing all this produce and stuff. He's hungry, right? But that's become his way of living. Right? That's what he does. All day long, he just steals to eat. And here for the rabbis, or at least for Maimonides here in the Mishnah Torah, there's no consideration of stopping his behavior. It just becomes his way of life, and the rabbis don't like that. Now, in the eyes of the tradition, there's no such thing as too small of theft, like a petty theft that's just, it's a little nothing, like, what is the giant corporation of Netflix going to care if I take my parents' password. Well, they stopped that now, so you can't do that. What does it matter to them? This is the everybody does it syndrome, right? And as members of a shared society, we participate in stealing even these little things if we indirectly support it. So the last source that I brought is also from the Talmud, from Bava Kama. Rabbi Yochanan says, anyone who robs another of an item worth 1 pruta, this is like a tiny bit of currency, is considered as though he takes his soul from him. As it is stated, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy for profit. It takes away the life of the owner thereof. So, wow, it's not just don't do it. It's like, that's like murder, right? That he's placing theft and this little tiny bit of theft onto this really, really intense ethical level. So I want to go back to our friend for our conversation in our small groups of Jean Valjean from Les Mis, who stole this loaf of bread to feed his family, because I still feel like it's a little bit uncertain about, is this okay or not? Part of our tradition views theft as theft, no matter the reason, and part prioritizes saving the life over almost any other mitzvah, including lo tignov, you shall not steal. So the question is, Jean Valjean stole a loaf of bread to feed his starving family. What is the ethical and or Jewish response, in your opinion, to his conduct? Go ahead and discuss. Yai la la die 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 die. Yai da da die 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 die. Yai la 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 la. You can sing with me. Yai da da die 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 die. La 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la. Yai la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la. Yai la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yan da 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 da. Yan da 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 da. Yai la 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 la. Yan la 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 la. Yai la da 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 da. Yai da da. So I'm curious to know if anyone would like to share what they thought about Jean Valjean. What did your group come up with about his liability for theft? Beginning scene 1, act 1, of Les Mis. Please. Yeah, we do have a lot of compassion for him. And it's interesting because Jean Valjean is a character. We were talking in our group about, what happens right after he's freed from or released from jail. At the beginning, the first thing he does, he steals, right? He steals the silver. But then he has this whole redemptive arc, right? And so it's, he did what he needed to do. And he's in a terrible predicament. So it's hard to say, exactly what it is. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, we talked about systems, and basically he's a victim of a system that is actually stealing from him, stealing his livelihood, stealing his, because for the greed and the profit, they talked about the greed and the profit, the greed for profit in the last sentence there of the passage. And, we can easily transpose that to today with these larger systems that argue, that I'm not even going to say arguably, that do in fact make it impossible for what would otherwise probably be an honest person to make a living, and then they have to resort to these things. So, who is the thief?
Right. So these larger issues of injustice that are impacting, this individual's responsibility towards justice is very complicated. Joseph.
I was just thinking that often we sort of think of it as the poor are stealing, but if you look at, there was something in CBC about the forced labor and the slavery and the forced marriage in the world, and how basically everybody in the West is stealing with their money. Everything we buy is not the actual value that it is worth. So I just wanted to say that because I think often we sort of go to the needy or the one that's the other way, but people with money would perhaps steal more.
Yeah, right. So there's a whole other angle we could go on this topic about what are other kinds of theft. I mean, we talked about AI and intellectual theft and things like that, and then theft of labor and all of these different things. Indeed, absolutely. Charlie, and then we're gonna have to move on. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the rabbis are like, oh, stealing is bad because it forms a habit. And I think if we bring the Aladdin concept up, that he builds a habit out of stealing. But when he marries Jasmine and he gets the genie to give him all this cool stuff, he doesn't steal anymore. When he gets so it's not building a habit because
We're going a deep read into Aladdin tonight, but right. Well, I think it's what the rabbis are really concerned about is that you think, oh, it's just a tiny thing, and then you start to excuse it, right? Like it's it causes some sense of what's acceptable, right? And it changes your mindset and your ethical boundaries in a dangerous way. Okay, we're going to have to stop there because we have more interesting things to talk about. So I'm very happy to invite Rabbi Hannah Dresner.
Thanks. I need the bat mitzvah step stool. So, when my colleagues and I discussed the idea of exploring the commandment, thou shalt not steal, I wondered to myself what kind of thievery I might be committing and what sensitivity or teshuvah I might need to engage in around this command, even though I think of myself as a person who's not taking something that doesn't belong to me. And I became interested in the question of holy borrowing, as my teacher, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, called our Jewish adaptation and even adoption of traditions and observances from religions and cultural neighbors, folding these into our own rituals and liturgy as ways of deepening our spiritual experience. Of course, there's always been impact from our host cultures on all over the globe on Jewish custom and ritual. If we just look at this vigil that we're engaged in, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, our medieval Kabbalists rose at midnight on Erev Shavuot to adorn the Shekhinah with words of Torah in preparation for commemorating Sinai. And scholars of Kabbalah, like Gershom Sholom and Danny Matt, write of this custom as parallel to the midnight vigil common amongst Christian monks from the early medieval time. In the Zohar itself, Rabbi Yehuda alludes to the Christian practice, saying, I have seen something similar amongst the nations of the world. That something similar, a medieval Christian vigil, is adapted as the early form of this vigil, recontextualized with an imagining of God delighted in the company of the souls of the righteous in the Garden of Eden, and our study of Torah here on earth reflecting that celestial gathering. And the custom of eating dairy, cheesecake, milchiks on Shavuot, is also an adaptation of a Roman pagan holiday when milk was used and consumed in worship of the pastoral god Pallas at the beginning of the summer season, because dairy products were perceived as directly related to the regeneration at this time of the year. And later, rather than forcing people to abandon that common practice, religious leaders reinvested the accepted symbol of milk as representing fertility with new meaning. So the Jews of Europe were no longer celebrating the cycles of the seasons, but they folded the custom of eating dairy into their central concept of Shavuot, which was revelation at Sinai, during which time the children of Israel refrained from eating meat. An example of holy borrowing that stands out in our time is Jewish adaptation of mindfulness meditation. What we call mindfulness is really the decontextualization and then recontextualization of Pali or Sati, which in Indian Buddhist tradition implies awareness, attention, or alertness, and Vipassana, which means gathering insight cultivated by meditation. Even as there are meditative technologies within Judaism, the methods adopted and adapted by hundreds of contemporary meditating and meditation teaching rabbis, including me, most resemble the Buddhist models. I wonder if you know that right now there are 450 Jewish clergy across the denominational spectrum trained in mindfulness by the Institute of Jewish Spirituality alone. These are rabbis and cantors who have undergone several years of mindfulness training and are now weaving mindfulness into synagogue life and prayer. The question of whether this is holy borrowing or whether it's cultural appropriation is a matter of power and power differentials. Cultural appropriation is an abuse of power, and holy borrowing is not. So, for example, when we encounter a chuppah at a non-Jewish wedding, I'm not talking about an interfaith wedding, a non-Jewish wedding, or we see non-Jews breaking a glass at the end of their wedding ceremony, we might feel a little aghast, like, that's ours, that's our tradition. And it's true that the chuppah, representing the home that this couple is going to build, or representing the welcome that will be fostered in that home, is an appealing universal idea. But how do we feel when the majority culture subsumes something of our ritual in our ritual of marriage? And yes, it's nice to remember the suffering of the world by breaking a glass at the end of the ceremony. But how do we feel when the breaking of that glass, at least in part, represents to us an acknowledgement of a particular, indeed, our unique suffering? What about Christian Passover Seders? By this, I mean the use of the form of our Seder adapted to a Christian liturgy recalling Jesus' Last Supper, or even embracing our biblical experience of slavery and emancipation as a shared Judeo-Christian sacred narrative. Many of us are likely to experience this as an abuse of Christian power. Why? Because it appropriates our minority culture's ritual into an expression of Christendom, calling to mind many past abuses of Christian power over Jews, murders even around Passover and Easter. On the other hand, in 1989, when the Dalai Lama appealed to Jewish spiritual leaders for advice on how to help his people survive exile with their heritage intact, Reb Zalman, who was part of the delegation to Dharamsala, offered the Passover Seder as a model, emphasizing the importance of parent-to-child transmission for the sake of saving an imperiled culture. Reb Zalman and Rabbi Yitz Greenberg and Roger Kamenetz et al. Celebrated Seder with the Tibetans declaring next year in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, their own Jerusalem. And the Jews present, including the Orthodox, were pleased to share the efficacy of one of our most potent teaching tools. Seder in the hands of dominant Christian faith may feel to be threateningly appropriative, whereas Seder offered to an imperiled Tibetan sect may feel to be a mitzvah. The question about mindfulness hinges, I think, on whether we do harm in making use of these methods? Do we do damage supporting psychological wellness and uplifting Jewish kavanah through recontextualization of Buddhist practice? On the surface, we might say no. Mindfulness has become so elastic that it now incorporates a range of practices that really are completely divorced from Buddhist traditions. But that might just be the transgression. There might be reason to say that our Western uses of mindfulness whitewashes Buddhism, separating these specific techniques from their more complex religious context and Asian origins. While Western mindfulness meditation has rendered Buddhism fashionable, Asian people in our communities are silenced and marginalized, indeed, during COVID, discriminated against. And the quality of life and freedoms Asians in their own countries do or don't, are not afforded, is generally far from the concerns uppermost in our minds. Maybe the Tikkun for mindfulness meditating Jews is to be more aware of centering Asia and Asian people in Asian studies. Here's another example of borrowing that I've participated in for many years and only recently come to question. My parents often invited non-Jewish guests to our Shabbat and holiday celebrations. And these guests brought prayer songs of their own to the table, offering these upon occasion as a counterpoint to the Zmirot and Nigunim the family sang. Some of these became incorporated into our family culture, such that as a child, I didn't know that Amazing Grace was not a Zmirah. And I didn't know that Go Down Moses was not a part of everyone's Seder liturgy. And among civil rights activist families in the mid-20th century, Negro spirituals, with their powerful expression of yearning for freedom, were sung at Seder. The custom gathered momentum with freedom Seders and became widespread over time. I was raised to believe that African Americans and Jews had an affinity for one another because we had all been slaves. We were connected in this. But it is only more recently that I've come to consider that there's a big difference between our sacred mythology of slavery and African slavery in America only a few generations ago, fresh in family histories, still so unresolved and unhealed. Here's what I offer for your small group consideration. First, some paragraphs to read on the issue of Go Down Moses at Passover Seders from the perspective of Shekinah Larks, a Jew of color on the staff of Bechol Lashon, an organization dedicated to raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience. For Shekinah Larks, renditions of Go Down Moses at Passover Seders problematically compare Jewish cultural memory to the historical and contemporary trauma of Black people, ignoring that Negro spirituals are cloaked in biblical illusion as a necessity. Black slaves couldn't speak directly about their situation, but song and Bible song was acceptable and served as code. So here are my questions for you. Is incorporation of Negro spirituals into our Haggadot a respectful, holy borrowing Or is it the thievery of cultural appropriation? Or where might it fall on the continuum between the two? And if there is tikkun to be made around this practice, what might we do to be sensitive? What might we do or add to our seders so that our adoption of these songs do no harm and instead extend radical empathy? Over to you.
our last time. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Sing it with me. Ya la, ya la, ya la 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 la. Ya la, ya la, ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la. That's your signal that we are coming back together. Rabbi Joseph.
So just a very few comments. Is there anything anybody wants to share? I can't see who that is. So you're taking a very strict approach there. Sylvia. Nice. Thank you. Did any groups talk about how you might maintain the singing of Negro spirituals in your Seder and make them into a cultural appreciation or a holy borrowing, or ensure that they are? John?
Well, we're sort of proud that the Negro spirituals appropriated Moses.
Yes, yes,
Very much it's a question of power
yes.
and how the power happens. And the appropriation of Moses to people who are also oppressed as we were is something that makes us proud.
Thank you.
Our appropriating the spiritual might be a bit different.
So the black enslaved person appropriating Moses was a comfort that somebody like Harriet Tubman, the Moses, could stand up to power and create an exodus or an escape. But our use of the song is not quite the same as that. Yes.
Yeah, Moses was a very popular given name, after
That's right.
Lincoln.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's makes sense that there would be a fondness for emancipators.
Charles.
I think we need to ask the Christians to give us our God back. Our prayers are stolen for the Catholic Mass, even the Catholic Mass. They're stolen for Protestants, so they quote from the prophets interpreting incorrectly. I think we go far beyond no saviors for Christians.
Thank you, Charles.
Amen to that.
Is there one last desire to speak, or shall we? I'm sorry? Oh, yeah.
Until this evening, I'd never heard of Gogel Moses being used in any Jewish ceremony. I knew some, I didn't know it was. So my reaction is, I don't understand how it ever got incorporated. The Jewish experience is thoroughly told in the Jewish Seder, and that doesn't stop us having empathy for the black experience, the civil rights movement, or anything like that. But I have yet to be persuaded that will enhance my Seder if it's incorporated.
How many of you have heard it sung at a Seder? Yeah. 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 Okay. I thought I saw one more. Yeah.
I was going to say, as someone who grew up singing that song in my Seder, I stand by my father's decision to sing at the time. But I do think now that it's, so particularly because it's that retelling of our stories, this interplay of cultural exchange, right? If it was just a Harriet Tubman song, it'd be a different story, but it's a Moses song. And so I think it's lovely that, that they took our story and then we think it's a great tune and we redo it. But I do think you're asking what do you take from that going forward? I do think it's impossible from now for me to sing that without also contextualizing it.
Thank you.
The song in context of how it was utilized by the people and the ongoing struggle that community still faces, because it's not a historic challenge like maybe it is for us.
So, not just assuming that we have that affinity, but actually speaking about what that experience is for itself, and then letting the two stand together yeah, thank you. I think we'll stop there. I'm sorry, because I know we have a whole nother segment.
Esher Koach. Wow. This was really a fantastic evening of learning. So thank you for everyone for sharing your insights, and I heard lots of wonderful conversations. We're going to shift now into the sun has set and we are ready for our evening service. So we're going to invite everyone, and maybe if those seated around want to take for a neighbor to find a Siddur. There's some on this bookshelf inside. They're the upper ones. They say Mishkan Tefillah. There's some outside the door here as well. We'll invite Cantor Cohen and Rabbi Stein to lead us in our Mariv service. See all of my notes right now.
Do you like the seat?
Yeah, we can scoot it over. People don't realize it moves. It moves quite easily.
You know, like press and stuff. Should we mention Dan again? Just say I am Dan last week. Did she just say a sick child?
Judah was like, that's what she said.
No, that's what she said, a sick child. It's not too specific.
Yeah.
People get very nosy about these things.
Yeah.
I love this 3F.
Yeah, well, Trad? Trad?
Totally. Yeah, Trad.
That's on the ground now.
So you want me to lead the response?
I'll do it with you. It's a little tricky.
Okay. I can handle it. But you do it with me.
We'll do it together.
Hopefully my Mariv RV will be similar to your response.
We don't do this, we just read it.
Oh.
Well, whatever you want to do is fine.
I was going to do like silent until here. Okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just do whatever.
I didn't want to tell you what to do. You're in charge.
Should we do a shout out to Kylie?
I already texted her.
What?
I already texted her and told her she loved it.
Welcome again, everyone. It's really lovely that we're all together here. Good Yantif, Chag Sameach, and thank you again to our teachers from the past hour or two. It's been a pleasure, as it has been in the past few years, to work with some colleagues in the city to put together a service a Mariv evening service that we can do together. I am not Rabbi Dan Moskovitz, as most of you know. We wish him and his family well this evening. But I put this service together along with Cantor Cohen and Rabbi Moskovitz, and so the two of us will lead us into Mariv and Shavuot together. So why don't we rise for Baruch Hu on page 394.
Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Morach Leolam Vaed.
We can be seated. We continue quietly on page 396. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'yadro mariv haravim b'chol ma'apetei asher yimu b'nam shnei machalitos. Umavir yom umevi laila umavdil ben yom vein laila Adonai tzavot shemo el chai v'kayam tamid yamoch aleinu leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai hamariv aravim. 398.
Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael amchavta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta Al ken Adonai Eloheinu v'shochveinu u'kumeinu nasiach b'chokecha ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם לעולם ועד כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו ובהם נגה יומם ולילה ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל.
We turn to the Shema together on page 400.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Ve'afta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha ve'hayu ha'devarim ha'eleh asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantaham levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha havaderech uvshochbecha uvkumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha vehayu letotafot beinenecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvihisharecha A little page turning now during the Shema. We'll be going in a moment together to 462 for the third paragraph of the Shema. As we have some quiet time, if you'd like to do the middle paragraph, it's on the handout on the top right. Again, 462. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem, ve'asu lahem tzitzit, al kanfei bigdehem ledorotam, ve'natenu al tzitzit hakanaf, patil techelet, ve'haya lachem letzitzit, uritem oto, uzchartem ekol mitzvot Adonai, va'asitem otam, ve'lo taturu, acharei levavechem, ve'acharei einechem, asher atem zonim achareihem, למען תזכרו ועשיתם כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם Adonai Elohechem Emet. And back to page 404. Ve'emunah kol zeh v'kayam aleinu ki hu Adonai Eloheinu ein b'lad Malchuto v'ratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe u'Miriam uvnei Yisrael lachanu shira v'sim rabba. Page 406, Mi Chamocha.
Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi Chamocha nedar b'kodesh. Nora tehilot osef ele, Nora tehilot osef ele. Malchotecha ra'u banecha, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה עלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד. ונאמר, יפקד אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו. Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael.
Hashkivenu on the next page.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, leshalom. Vehamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, haboreh sukat shalom, aleinu, aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim.
We rise on page 410 towards the bottom. Instead of Vishamrut, not Friday night, it is Erev Yantif, so we can all read together these two short lines, Vaidaber Moshe et Moadei Adonai el Bnei Yisrael. And we turn now to the Hatzi Kadesh. We're jumping again to page 451. Is that right?
I think so. Yes,
It is right.
Yes, it is. Go us. Yitgadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rava ve'alma divra chirutei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'b'chayei dechol beit Yisrael b'gala u'bizman kariv ve'meru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam olam me'amaya yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh ve'yithadar ve'yitalev ve'yitala shemei dekudsham richo le'ela sorry. Leila min kol v'chata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma ve'meru amen.
The festival Kiddush, Kiddush is later. Festival Amidah for evenings starts on page 468 and 470, and it goes for a while through page 480. On the handout, we have a couple different versions for the first paragraph of the Amidah, just slightly different wording, and then Yale V'yavo, a little bit tiny bit longer version of that one on the bottom left of the handout. So we'll take some time now for the Amidah. Oh, sorry, there was a handout over there in the hallway. I apologize. It looks like that. Shalom bimroma. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Imru, amen. If you do have the handout, Kaddish Shalem is on the upper left. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabba v'yalama divara kirute v'yamlich malchute b'chayachonu v'yamechonu v'chayidocho beit Yisrael b'agalav izman kariv v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach v'alam me'amaya yitbarach Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudesha v'yichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran v'yalama v'imeru. Amen. Tikabel tzlot hon v'od hon d'chol Yisrael kodam v'honi v'shmaya v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shalama rabba mishmaya v'chayim aleinu v'chol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'chol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen. You may be seated if you're still standing. And now we have put aside some time for announcements and thank yous. I'd like to thank, first of all, Cantor Cohn for leading this service with me, and to Rabbi Dan for planning it. The three of us, it was a pleasure to work on this. A few years ago, I think maybe when we were at King David doing this, Rabbi Brown and I planned a service together, and we said, why don't we, Rabbi Dresner, the three of us, we'll each bring Sidurim from our shuls. Is it called 8 Ratzon? Yes, so 8 Ratzon from our Shalom, and ours is called Lev Shalem, and this is Mishkan Tefillah. We just each brought like buckets of Sidurim, and it was great because everyone could just take whatever Sidur they wanted, either the one they're used to or one that they're not used to. But this year we decided to lug over a bunch of Sidurim on a Thursday night, and then how do we get them back? And what if we don't have enough for tomorrow and the next day? So one Sidur and a handout, and thank you all for joining us in our joint prayer. It's really something I enjoy doing with colleagues. And thank you to Rabbis Brown and Infeld and Dresner and Gibbs for their really wonderful teachings on this important commandment from the 10 Commandments, or utterances. And thank you to Temple Shalom and all of their staff for hosting this evening. And again to Lissa for making the cheesecake, which we know...
We're all very excited for.
We're all very... I'm between all of you in the cheesecake right now, sorry. And thank you all for being here. Let's wrap up with Aleinu and Mourner's Kaddish, and then I'll chant over there. After the Kaddish, I'll chant the festival Kiddush and Motzi so we can go into our cheesecake.
586.
Please rise.
Please rise, yes, that too. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotze breshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo asamanu kemishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. 588. שהוא נוטה שמיים ויסד הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום בשבות אל לבבך Adonai hu Elohim בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד כן נקבל לך
We're on to 590.
תמלוך עליהם בעד, כי המלכות שלך ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
You may be seated. If it's your custom to stand for Kaddish or you're saying Kaddish for someone, you're welcome to remain standing. We didn't bring all of our different Sidurim here. We also, I don't think, brought all of our different Kaddish and yahrzeit lists. But if there's anyone who sang Kaddish for a yahrzeit or recent passing and you'd like to mention their name, please feel welcome. Okay, we're on page 598. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, v'yalama divara kirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'gala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehe shmei rabbah mevarach le'elam lamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar, v'yit ale, v'yit halal, shmei kudasha, b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, damiran b'alama v'imru, amen. Yehe shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom ben romav, huya aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. You can be seated. In Kansas City in 2009, 2010, 2011, the cantor at my shul when I was assistant rabbi was Chazan Rob Menace, who's now the chaplain up the road at Louis Breyer in Weinberg. And he and I had a joke that rabbis only know how to say things in English and cantors only know how to sing things in Hebrew or Aramaic. So is there anything you want to say in English?
Actually, one thing that I was thinking about in the spirit of our discussion today, the nusach that you heard, the 3 festival nusach, I did not write it. I was taking it from Chazan Israel Alter. So everything comes from somewhere else. You can ask me more about it later. Everything should be
I think I should ask you to stand for Kiddush. If you'd like to follow along, it's on page 386. And after Kiddush, you can see how much of this Manischewitz I can get down. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol aham v'romamanu mikol lashon v'kiddashanu b'mitzvotav v'titen lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'yahava modim l'simcha hagim uzmanim l'sason et yom hag hashavuot hazeh zman matan toratenu mikra kodesh zecher l'tziat mitzrayim Mitzrayim, Kivanu v'acharta v'otanu kidashta, Mikol hamim modei kodshecha, B'simcha v'sason hinchaltanu, Baruch ata Adonai, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazemanim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. All right, that was enough. And so we can go into our Yontif meal. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al nitilat yadayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
Chag Sameach.
Chag
Good Yontif. B'tei Avon. Through there?
Yep,
through there is
through
the
those
cheesecake.
doors. Chag Sameach. Okay.